Hey guys, welcome back to our discussions here on our Period 5 lessons, and today we're going to take a look at kind of how does sectionalism continue to grow and eventually rise into a civil war where the slave states and the free states just cannot get along, and we're going to kind of see the build-up going from 1850 onward. So before we go ahead, just remember to take a recap or think back to what we talked about last time, which was from 1820 to 1850, sectionalism was a issue, but was tended to be resolved. And as we see in 1850 onward, that's going to not be the case. So if we look at these two maps here, first thing I want you to take a look at is what major changes took place from 1850 to 1854, and then do you believe that with this Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, do we have the Missouri Compromise still in effect? And tell me, how can you tell us? So go ahead and pause and answer those two questions and then hit play when you're ready. So again, just to show the difference of the risingness of sectionalism, we talked about how, in the 30 years prior to what we're talking about today, that sectionalism was mild, that it was resolved by compromise, whether it was the Missouri Compromise or the Compromise of 1850 with the addition of California and the addition of the Fugitive Slave Act. However, from 1850 to 1860, or 1856, we'll say, that is not going to be the case, and that abolition is going to be a huge movement now coming into the North, and they're not just going to question the expansion of slavery, but the morality of slavery and whether slavery should even exist at all, especially westward, but even in anywhere in the United States. So the abolition movement is really going to rise in 1850 with this new Fugitive Slave Act. And we mentioned this before, that with the Fugitive Slave Act, really any slaves that were found to have run away could be returned and recaptured by the federal government or the state's governments, and that people in the North were actually found guilty of helping these fugitive slaves could be fined or imprisoned for what they've done, and this is going to lead to an abolition movement growing in the North. Now, William Lloyd Garrison is going to be one of the major leaders of this. He is a newspaper publisher. He creates the newspaper called The Liberator, which was an anti-slavery society works, and really kind of helped to spread the ideas of the evilness and the wickedness of slavery in the South. Frederick Douglass, a former slave himself, is going to be a huge abolitionist and eventually a advisor to President Lincoln when we get to the Civil War. But he is going to speak out of the horrors of the slavery that he experienced. And a pair of sisters called the Grimke sisters, who are staunch abolitionists, are actually going to move from the South to the North and go through and talk about their abolition movement, and they're opposing this to slavery, about the evilness and wickedness of slavery. And it's actually going to get to the point where they're actually banned from returning to the South, where they are threatened with imprisonment for their speaking out against it if they return. And with this Fugitive Slave Act is going to become Harriet Tubman's Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman, of course, being a former slave, is going to help over hundreds and hundreds of slaves find freedom using a system of the Underground Railroad, a system of silent communication of abolitionists, helping them to reach their way to the North where they can find freedom. And these quilt patterns would be examples to show secret messages, whether you have the monkey wrench, getting slaves to prepare to flee or to run, but that they are in danger, or the drunkard path was meant to kind of show them to follow a straight route north, that they were safe to travel to where they were going. Another huge abolitionist movement, or a public works that is going to help rise the ideas of abolition, is going to be the writing of Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And this is actually going to become the book's bestseller in the U.S. during this time period. And it's going to kind of portray slavery as a moral evil and will inspire many in the North to join this abolitionist movement. So with the growing rise of abolition ideas and feelings in the northern or the free states, we fast forward a little bit to 1854, and Senator Stephen Douglas is in charge of trying to create a transcontinental railroad all the way from Chicago here in Illinois to California. And what that means is that if it's cutting through the Utah territories and the Kansas-Nebraska territories, that there needs to be some sort of determination or some sort of action taken to solve the issue of slavery in these two territories. And what's going to happen is that Stephen Douglas is going to push for this Kansas-Nebraska Act, which would basically introduce slavery, or would kind of counter the Missouri Compromise, because if you remember that above this 36th parallel was supposed to be no more slavery outside of the state of Missouri and the states that were already admitted into the Union, but no new territories above this line were allowed to condone slavery. Well, by giving the Kansas-Nebraska Act legality, it's going to put forward a popular sovereignty vote to allow slavery into both these territories. So in both Nebraska and in Kansas, the citizens of these territories are going to get to vote on whether they want to keep slavery or abolish it altogether. So again, in order to do this with this Kansas-Nebraska, the Missouri Compromise had to be abandoned. And if you can imagine that if you're part of the Free Society, if you're an abolitionist, this angers you deeply because you do not want slavery to expand. You want to try to retract it as much as you can if you cannot outrightly abolish it. So the North is going to be very upset with this Kansas-Nebraska Act. And with this anger, the newly formed Free Soil Party will kind of transform into, in 1854,